My name is Alex Carter, and until a few months ago, my life was pretty uneventful. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, spending most of my days hunched over a laptop in my cramped New York City apartment. But when a client offered me a 6-month contract in Ohio, I saw it as an opportunity to escape the chaos of the city and maybe save some rent money. I wanted something simple, a quiet place where I could focus on work without sirens blaring outside my window every hour. After scrolling through Craigslist and Zillow for weeks, I stumbled across what seemed like the perfect spot. 42 Elm Street, a modest 2-bedroom house in a small suburban neighborhood about 30 minutes outside Columbus. The listing photos showed a charming little home with a white picket fence, a cozy front porch, and an overgrown backyard that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. It wasn't fancy or modern, but it had character. Exposed wooden beams, vintage light fixtures, and creaky floors that gave it a rustic feel. When I first walked in, I felt hopeful. Sure, the air smelled faintly musty, and the wallpaper in the living room was peeling slightly, but nothing major. The real estate agent assured me everything was structurally sound. "It's been empty for a while," she said with a casual smile. "I just need someone to bring it back to life." Little did I know how true those words would turn out to. The first night in the house felt off. Not alarmingly so, just enough to keep me tossing and turning. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed longer than they should be, stretching unnaturally across the walls despite the dim glow of the bedside lamp. Or maybe it was the faint sound of footsteps coming from upstairs, soft, deliberate taps that stopped whenever I called out, "Hello?" At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. Moving into a new home always comes with its share of quirks. Old houses settle, pipes groan, wind rattles windows. That's what I told myself anyway. But by the third night, things started getting harder to ignore. One evening, as I sat in the living room sketching ideas for my project, I heard a low whisper near the fireplace. At least I thought it was a whisper. It sounded muffled, like someone speaking through clenched teeth. When I turned around, no one was there. My heart raced, but again, I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Then came the cold spots. No matter how high I cranked the thermostat, certain areas of the house remained freezing. Standing in the kitchen one morning, sipping coffee, I noticed goosebumps rising on my arms. The temperature dropped so suddenly that my breath fogged in front of me, and yet when I stepped into the adjacent hallway, it was warm enough to make me sweat. By now, I knew something wasn't right. But instead of leaving, or even telling anyone, I decided to investigate. Deep down, I think I was curious. What was causing these strange occurrences? Was it faulty wiring, a drafty foundation, or something else entirely? It was during one of these late-night investigations that I stumbled upon the hidden door. I'd been exploring the basement, looking for anything unusual, a loose floorboard, strange markings, anything that might explain the phenomena. Most of the space was cluttered with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. There were boxes stacked against the far wall, labeled with faded handwriting I couldn't decipher. As I moved them aside, I noticed something odd about the wall behind them. A section of the paneling didn't quite match the rest. Upon closer inspection, I realized it wasn't part of the original structure. It was a makeshift door painted to blend in. My pulse quickened as I pressed my hand against it. It gave slightly under my touch, revealing a narrow gap along the edge. Using a crowbar I'd brought down earlier, just in case, I pried it open. The hinges screamed in protest, releasing a waft of damp, earthy air that made my stomach churn. Inside was pitch blackness, so thick it felt almost tangible. I hesitated for a moment before shining my flashlight inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The beam illuminated rows of jagged symbols carved into the stone walls. They looked ancient, almost tribal, pulsing faintly in the dim light as if alive. Beneath them lay scattered objects, an old doll missing half its face, a rusted knife, fragments of bone. And then, just as I leaned in for a better look, something shifted in the darkness. A low growl echoed from deep within the passage, followed by the unmistakable sound of movement, something heavy dragging itself toward me. Before I could react, The flashlight flickered and died, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. After that terrifying discovery in the basement, I didn't sleep for 2 days. Every creak of the house, every shadow moving across the walls felt like a threat. My mind kept replaying the growl, the guttural, animalistic sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the earth. And then there was the flashlight dying at the worst possible moment. Coincidence? Maybe. But I wasn't willing to take that chance. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even some latent fear of the dark. But no matter how hard I rationalized, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me. It started subtly, almost innocuously. At first it was just the sense of being followed. When I went grocery shopping, I'd catch glimpses of the same man standing near the end of an aisle or leaning against a car in the parking lot. He wore a hoodie pulled low over his face, so I never got a good look at him. But the way he stood perfectly still, staring, it gave me chills. At home, things only got worse. One night, as I sat at the kitchen table working on my laptop, I noticed movement outside the window. It was dark out, but the faint glow of the porch light illuminated the backyard. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. Then I saw it, a figure, standing motionless beneath the oak tree, partially hidden by the shadows. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. The beam of light swept across the yard, revealing nothing but empty space. Whoever, or whatever, had been standing there was gone. But the next morning I found footprints in the mud leading right up to the back door. Large, heavy prints that didn't match any shoes I owned. They stopped abruptly, as if whoever made them had simply vanished into thin air. Over the next few days, the incidents escalated. My phone began ringing constantly, unknown numbers flashing on the screen. When I answered, all I heard was static, occasionally interrupted by faint breathing. Once I thought I heard my name whisper through the noise, but when I asked who was calling, the line went dead. Then came the notes, slips of paper tucked under the doormat or wedged into the mailbox. Each one contained the same message, written in jagged handwriting: "Leave now." At first I assumed it was a prank. Maybe kids from the neighborhood are messing with me. But after finding the fourth note taped to my bedroom window, I realized this wasn't random. Someone, or something, wanted me out of the house. The final straw came late one evening. I was in the living room, scrolling through Netflix, trying to distract myself from everything happening around me. That's when I heard it. A loud thud from upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps crossing the hallway above my head. Every muscle in my body froze. I knew I was alone in the house. I hadn't seen another soul since moving. And slowly I grabbed the baseball bat I'd brought down from the closet just in case, and crept toward the staircase. The steps creaked under my weight, each groan echoing louder than I expected. By the time I reached the top, my palms were slick with sweat. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by the moonlight streaming through the windows. Everything looked normal, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone else being there. But then I saw it. The door to the spare bedroom, the one I rarely used, was slightly ajar. I could have sworn I'd closed it earlier. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open with the tip of the bat. Inside, the room was exactly as I'd left it. Dusty furniture draped in old sheets, boxes stacked neatly against the far wall. Nothing out of place, except for the mirror. Hanging on the wall opposite the bed was an antique mirror, its frame tarnished and cracked. As I stared into it, I saw something move behind me in the reflection. A shadow, dark, hulking, and impossibly tall, loomed just inches away from where I stood. I spun around, raising the bat defensively, but there was nothing there. Just empty space. And yet in the mirror, the shadow remained, watching me. That's when the whispers started again. This time they weren't muffled or distant. They were clear, sharp, and coming from everywhere at once. "You shouldn't have stayed. This is not your home. Run." Panic surged through me as the temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the windows, spreading outward in jagged patterns. The lights flickered violently, casting the room into alternating states of darkness and harsh brightness. Suddenly, the mirror shattered. Shards of glass rained down, slicing through the air like knives. I threw myself backward, shielding my face with my arms. When I finally dared to look up, the shadow was gone, but the words etched into the wall above the broken mirror weren't. "Get out or die." The message scrawled above the shattered mirror, "Get out or die," was impossible to ignore. It wasn't written in ink or paint. It looked like it had been burned into the wall itself, blackened edges curling slightly as if scorched by intense heat. My hands trembled as I traced the letters with my fingertips, half expecting them to burn me too. But they didn't. Whatever force had left this warning wasn't interested in physical harm. Yet. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room, clutching the baseball bat like a lifeline. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside, made me jump. Sleep was out of the question. Instead, I scrolled through my phone, searching for answers. Who built this house? Why did the previous tenants leave? What was that strange door in the basement? That's when I found it, a Reddit thread titled "Haunted Houses of Ohio." Someone had posted about 42 Elm Street years ago, claiming it was cursed. According to the post, the house had been abandoned since the 1970s, after a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances. Locals avoided it, calling it the Devil's Den. Scrolling further, I stumbled across comments mentioning an old man named Harold Grayson, who supposedly lived in the house decades ago. He was described as reclusive, obsessed with occult practices. One commenter even claimed he performed rituals in the basement, trying to summon something, or someone, from another realm. My stomach churned at the thought. Could those symbols carved into the walls be connected to his so-called rituals? And if so, what exactly had he summoned? Determined to find out more, I decided to revisit the hidden door in the basement. Armed with a new flashlight, and wearing gloves this time, I descended the stairs cautiously. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint smell of damp earth filled my nostrils. When I reached the bottom, I hesitated for a moment before approaching the door. Pushing it open, I stepped inside. The narrow passage led to a small chamber, barely large enough to stand in. The jagged symbols glowed faintly in the beam of my flashlight, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. In the center of the room sat an altar, an uneven slab of stone covered in dried bloodstains. Surrounding it were candles melted down to stubs, their wax fused with dirt and ash. But the most unsettling discovery was a journal lying atop the altar. Its leather cover was cracked and brittle, but the pages inside were intact. Flipping through it, I realized it belonged to Harold Grayson. His handwriting was shaky, almost frantic, as if he'd been writing under duress. One entry caught my attention. It knows I'm here. I can feel it watching me, waiting. The ritual worked, but not the way I planned. It didn't come fully into our world. Instead, it lingers between realms, feeding on fear and despair. I tried to undo it, but it won't let me go. It says it. Wants more pain, more suffering. If anyone finds this, don't stay, leave while you still can. A chill ran down my spine. Whatever Harold had summoned, it wasn't gone. It was still here, trapped in the house with me. As I read further, I noticed something strange happening around me. The symbols on the walls began glowing brighter, casting eerie shadows that danced across the ceiling. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. It felt like the entire room was alive, breathing. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered again. This time it didn't go out completely. It dimmed just enough to make the shadows stretch unnaturally long. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Slowly, I turned my head. There it was. The shadow from the mirror. Only now it was closer, taller and far more menacing. Its form shifted constantly as if made of smoke, but its eyes remained fixed on me, glowing red orbs that pierced through the darkness. I stumbled backward, dropping the journal. The entity lunged forward, its shapeless mass pressing against me, suffocating. Panic surged through my veins as I scrambled toward the exit, clawing at the walls to steady myself. Just as I reached the doorway, the hum grew deafening and the temperature plummeted. And then silence. When I finally emerged from the basement gasping for air, I noticed something terrifying. All the doors and windows in the house were sealed, shut. Not locked, sealed, as if an invisible force had welded them closed. No matter how hard I pushed or pulled, nothing budged. Desperate for help, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The call connected, but when I tried to speak, all that came out was static. Frustrated, I hung up and tried texting instead. Each message failed to send, the screen flashing error over and over. That's when I heard footsteps overhead. Heavy, deliberate steps crossing the hallway. I froze, listening intently. There was no one else in the house, no one human at least. Summoning every ounce of courage, I returned to the living room and stared at the shattered mirror. The shadow lingered there, watching me. Then, in the reflection, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Behind me stood Harold Grayson, or at least, what was left of him. His body was gaunt, his skin stretched tight over bone, eyes hollow and empty. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, words appeared in my mind, echoing like a distant scream. "You're next." Before I could react, the lights went out. Darkness enveloped the house, thick and suffocating. And in that darkness, I felt it. A presence wrapping itself around me, whispering promises of pain and despair. When the power returned moments later, I was alone, or so I thought, because when I looked back at the mirror, the shadow smiled. After the horrifying encounter with Harold Grayson's ghost, or whatever it was, I couldn't stay in the house any longer. My mind raced as I frantically searched for answers online. If this thing had been summoned through a ritual, maybe there was a way to banish it too. Desperation drove me to dig deeper into occult forums and books about demonology. I eventually stumbled upon a post describing a counter-ritual designed to reverse summoning spells. It required specific items, a black candle, salt, iron nails, and something personal from the person performing the ritual. According to the instructions, the process would sever the connection between the entity and its anchor point, the house, and force it back into whatever hellish dimension it came from. It sounded insane, dangerous even. But at that point, I didn't care. Staying in the house meant certain death, or worse. I decided to try it. Gathering the materials wasn't easy. Most stores didn't carry black candles, so I had to drive 40 minutes to a metaphysical shop tucked away in a strip mall. The clerk gave me a wary look when I asked for everything on my list, but she didn't ask questions. By the time I got home, night had fallen, and the oppressive energy in the house felt stronger than ever. I set up the ritual in the basement, directly in front of the hidden door where I'd first discovered the symbols. Following the instructions, step by step I drew a circle of salt on the floor, placed the black candle at its center, and hammered iron nails into the corners to create a protective barrier. Then I added a lock of my hair to complete the setup. As I lit the candle, the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and writhing like living things. A low growl reverberated through the room, growing louder with each passing second. I could feel it watching me, waiting. Taking a deep breath, I began reciting the incantation, a string of Latin phrases I barely understood. At first, nothing happened. But then, the flame flickered violently, casting wild shadows across the room. The symbols carved into the walls glowed red-hot, burning brighter with every word I spoke. And then, chaos erupted. The ground beneath me shook violently, knocking me off balance. The candle toppled over, extinguishing itself in the spilled wax. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by the pulsing glow of the symbols. A deafening roar filled the air, shaking the very foundation of the house. From the shadows emerged the entity, no longer formless or vague. It took shape before my eyes, towering over me like a nightmare given flesh. Its body was a grotesque amalgamation of smoke and bone, its glowing red eyes fixed on me with predatory intent. Jagged claws extended from its hands, scraping against the stone floor as it advanced. I scrambled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stay back!" I shouted, clutching the iron nails like makeshift weapons. But the entity ignored me, moving closer with deliberate, menacing steps. Just as it reached the edge of the salt circle, the barrier flared to life, crackling with energy. For a moment, I thought it might hold, but then the entity let out another, ear-splitting roar, and the circle shattered like glass. With the protective barrier gone, I knew I had seconds at most before the entity attacked. Thinking quickly, I grabbed the black candle and hurled it toward the altar, hoping to disrupt the ritual somehow. The impact caused the old slab of stone to crack, sending shards flying in all directions. To my shock, the entity hesitated. Its growls turned into pained screeches, and its form wavered, becoming less solid. Seizing the opportunity, I lunged for the doorway, determined to escape the basement before it recovered. But as I reached the stairs, the lights went out. Total darkness enveloped me, pressing down like a weight. I fumbled blindly for the railing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. "Please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Leave me alone." Instead of answering, the entity lunged. I felt its icy grip close around my ankle, yanking me backward. I screamed, clawing at the wooden steps as it dragged me toward the chamber. Just as I thought it was over, a voice echoed through the darkness. "Stop." The entity froze, its grip loosening slightly. From the shadows stepped Harold Grayson, or rather, his spectral form. His hollow eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief moment I saw regret in them. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice echoing faintly. "But you've done what I couldn't. You've weakened it." Before I could respond, the entity roared, again turning its attention to Harold. The two figures clashed, their forms dissolving into streams of shadow and light. The entire basement trembled as they fought, the walls cracking under the strain. In the confusion, I managed to crawl upstairs and barricade myself in the living room. Exhausted and bleeding, I collapsed onto the couch, convinced I'd bought myself some time. But as dawn broke and sunlight streamed through the windows, I realized something terrible. The house was still sealed shut. And while the entity seemed weaker, Harold's presence lingered, whispering promises of protection. But at what cost? For hours after the ritual, I sat in the living room, clutching the baseball bat like a lifeline. My body ached from the struggle in the basement, and my mind raced with unanswered questions. Had I truly weakened the entity? Was Harold really trying to help me, or was he just another pawn in this nightmare? As daylight faded into dusk, the oppressive atmosphere returned, heavier than ever. The air grew colder and faint whispers echoed through the walls, growing louder with each passing minute. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and heading straight for me. I tightened my grip on the bat, bracing myself for whatever was coming. But when the figure appeared in the doorway, it wasn't the shadowy entity. It was Harold. His spectral form shimmered faintly in the dim light, his hollow eyes fixed on mine. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not done yet." "What do you mean?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "I did what you wanted. I performed the counter-ritual." Harold shook his head, his expression grim. "You think that thing is bound only to the house?" "No. It feeds on fear, despair, and guilt. You brought it here because of your own unresolved pain." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Memories flooded back. Memories I'd buried deep inside. The car accident. The argument that led to it. The lives lost because of my recklessness. I had spent years running from guilt, but now it felt like it was literally haunting me. Before I could respond, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness. A low growl reverberated through the house, followed by the sound of something massive moving toward us. "It's coming," Harold whispered urgently. "We have to finish this together." Without waiting for my response, Harold grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the staircase. His touch was icy, sending chills down my spine, but I didn't resist. We descended into the basement, where the hidden chamber awaited us. The symbols carved into the walls glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the entity's growls. This is the source, Harold explained, pointing to the cracked altar. Destroy it completely, and you might stand a chance. But how? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He handed me a rusted knife, the same one I'd seen earlier among the scattered objects. Use this. Cut yourself. Let your blood break the seal. My stomach churned at the thought, but I didn't see any other option. As I hesitated, the entity emerged from the shadows, its grotesque form towering over us. Its red eyes burned with fury, and its jagged claws scraped against the stone floor as it advanced. Do it now, Harold shouted, shoving me toward the altar. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pressed the blade to my palm and dragged it across my skin. Blood welled up instantly, dripping onto the cracked surface of the altar. The moment it touched the stone, the symbols erupted in flames, bathing the room in blinding light. The entity let out an ear-splitting screech, its form dissolving into smoke. But instead of vanishing entirely, it turned its attention to Harold, who stood between us like a shield. No! I screamed, lunging forward. But it was too late. The entity engulfed Harold, dragging him into the abyss. For a brief moment, his spectral form locked eyes with me, mouthing 2 final words before disappearing. Forgive yourself. As the flames subsided, the basement fell silent. The oppressive weight lifted, and the cold spots vanished. For the first time since moving into the house, I felt free. But the relief was short-lived. When I returned to the living room, I noticed something strange. All the doors and windows were still sealed shut, exactly as they had been before. Panic surged through me as I tried to pry them open, but nothing budged. And then I saw it. In the shattered mirror, my reflection stared back at me. But it wasn't alone. Behind me stood the shadowy figure, its glowing red eyes fixed on me with predatory intent. Only this time, it wasn't growling or attacking. It was smiling. A chill ran down my spine as the realization hit me. The entity hadn't been banished. It had simply found a new host. Me. Over the next few days, I became a prisoner in my own body. The entity whispered constantly, feeding on my guilt and fears. Every attempt to leave the house ended in failure. The doors remained sealed, the windows unbreakable. Even calling for help proved futile. No one could hear me scream. Desperate, I searched the house for anything that might help. That's when I found a letter tucked under the floorboards in the attic. It was addressed to me, written in Harold's shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, it means I failed. The entity thrives on pain, and it will never let you go unless you confront the truth, face your past, forgive yourself, or it will consume you completely. Tears streamed down my face as I realized what I had to do. I couldn't keep running from the accident, from the guilt, from the lives I'd destroyed. If I wanted to survive, I had to make peace with my actions, even if it meant facing the consequences alone. Weeks passed after I left 42 Elm Street, or rather, after the house finally let me leave. Physically, I was fine. My bruises had healed, my wounds had closed. But mentally, I was shattered. Nightmares plagued me every time I closed my eyes. Visions of twisted shadows, glowing red eyes, and hollow voices whispering my name. I tried, moving on, rebuilding my life. I rented a small apartment in Columbus, far from the suburbs and their creaky old houses. I threw myself into work, taking on more projects than I could handle, hoping to drown out the memories. But no matter how busy I stayed, the feeling of being watched never went away. It wasn't just paranoia. At least I didn't think so. Every now and then I'd catch glimpses of movement in the corners of my vision. Shadows that shouldn't exist would flicker across the walls. And late at night, when the world was quiet, I'd hear faint whispers echoing through the empty halls of my mind. Harold's words haunted me most of all. Forgive yourself. Easy enough to say, but forgiveness felt impossible. How could I forgive myself for something so unforgivable? For lives lost because of my carelessness? The guilt didn't just follow me. It consumed me. I stopped answering calls from friends, and family too ashamed to admit what I'd done. Work suffered too. Deadlines slipped, clients grew frustrated. Eventually, I isolated myself completely, afraid that if anyone got close, they'd see the darkness inside me. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't entirely alone. Something, or someone, was still with me, watching, waiting. One evening, as I sat in my apartment staring blankly at the TV, I received an anonymous package. No return address, no note, just a plain brown box sitting on my doorstep. Inside was a single object, a shard of cracked mirror, its surface fogged over as if coated with frost. My hands trembled as I picked it up. As soon as my fingers touched, the glass images flooded my mind. Flashes of the basement, the entity, Harold's spectral form dissolving into smoke. And then a voice. "You can't escape me." I dropped the mirror shard, heart racing, and backed away. When I looked down, again the glass was gone, vanished without a trace. Over the following weeks, strange things began happening around me. Objects moved on their own. Lights flickered unpredictably. Once I woke up in the middle of the night to find the words, "You belong to me," scrawled in condensation on my bedroom window. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a local historian specializing in paranormal phenomena. After hearing my story, he nodded gravely and said, "Some entities aren't bound by physical locations. They attach themselves to people, to souls. If you truly want to break free, you'll need to confront not just your guilt, but the source of its power." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It means," he replied, "that until you make peace with your past, it will always find a way back to you." Determined to end this once and for all, I returned to the site of the accident. It was a stretch of highway I hadn't visited in years, marked only by a weathered roadside memorial. Standing there under the pale moonlight, I spoke aloud the names of those I'd lost, apologizing for my role in their deaths. For a moment, I thought I felt relief, a lightness in my chest, a warmth spreading through my limbs. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something odd about the memorial plaque. Scratched into the metal, barely visible in the dim light, were 3 chilling words. "It's still here." A cold breeze swept past me, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter, not joyful or innocent, but low, guttural, and unmistakably familiar. The end.